It was only slightly after 6 when I reached Balloon Fiesta Park. I found the big tent with the party by following the lights and noise. For a crowd that often starts on their beer in the early morning, they're amazingly hearty in the evening. The upside, I figured, was that they all had to be up again by 4, so this shindig couldn't possibly go very late tonight. Ron stood by the bar, nursing his first beer of the evening. He's not a big drinker any time, and rarely at all when working. I could tell by the expression on his face, though, that he was bored and ready for this gig to be over. Well, poor baby. He'd spent the afternoon with an attractive woman and escorted her to a party. I approached and ordered a glass of Merlot. From the first sip, it didn't taste good to me. Oh, God, maybe I really was. Rather than bringing Ron's attention to it, I opted to carry the wine glass around with me instead of immediately ordering something else. He tipped his Stetson back and scratched at the skimpy hair above the hat band. "Food's over there," he said, indicating 2 long buffet tables at one end of the tent. Suddenly I felt a curious lightheadedness. I had to get something to eat. "Rachel's got a place in line, talking to the knockout blonde." I left Ron at the bar and blatantly cut in with her. Liz Pierce greeted me with that look that meant she remembered my face but not my name. "How was your day?" I asked Rachel. "Heaven. I never did get around to paying those bills and organizing my desk. I picked up a book I'd been meaning to read for weeks and did nothing else all day. I've got some good news about your dad." She nodded politely, but without lots of enthusiasm. "Later, okay?" We moved forward and loaded plates with brisket, coleslaw, potato salad, and baked beans. The noise in the tent had risen to that level where the drunks try to outshout the music, and the musicians keep turning up the amps to hear themselves over the drunks. I had to get out of there. Rachel moved to sit with a group of friends, smiling and appearing more relaxed than I'd seen her all week. Maybe she'd had a couple of glasses of wine. Maybe she'd just decided that she couldn't live in fear all the time. I caught Ron's eye and he moved closer to her. I stepped out of the tent, putting a small damper on the sound, but not much. I set my plate on the hood of a car that afforded the only scrap of warmth in the chilly evening, and proceeded to wolf down my meal. Ron followed a couple of minutes later, positioning himself so we could talk and he could keep an eye on Rachel through the open tent flap. "Sorry I got snappish earlier." I took another sip of the wine, which tasted better this time, and let the warm glow of the drink and solid comfort of food mellow me quickly. "Me too." Ron stood awkwardly by the car, scuffing one booted toe in the dust. I smiled and filled him in with the condensed version of what I'd learned in Clovis and this afternoon's surprising revelations by Dean Patterson. I also told him about Drake's call, but didn't let on that I might actually be getting used to the idea of having a baby. I still needed to work through all the debris floating around in my mind. He didn't seem to notice. His own muddled expressions told me that he was still processing everything from the political rivalry to the awful scheme Dean and Linda had come up with, to Linda's death. I dug into the barbecued meat with my plastic fork while he thought it over. "What's our next step with Rachel, now that we know her father isn't involved?" "So far, no one seems to have a very strong reason for wanting to take her out of the picture." He took a long pull on his beer. "So maybe we're dealing with a stranger, some nutcase who wants to make a name for himself by harming a famous person?" "It's not impossible, but it's usually the least likely scenario. 90% of the time a victim knows her killer. And it's usually the most likely suspect all along, the spouse, the boyfriend. Murder is a crime of passion, Charlie." I chewed down the last morsel of my Texas toast and followed it with one more sip of wine. I set the glass aside. I really shouldn't be drinking this stuff. "But we don't have a murder, yet. We have threats. We have words that talk about preventing Rachel from setting the record. We've assumed that the threats are real." "We have to." "Agreed. I'm not saying we shouldn't take them seriously. But maybe we can widen the scope of our search if we include people whose motives it is to gain the spotlight for themselves.
And that narrows our suspect list to what, a few million people?
He craned his neck to watch Rachel as she moved around inside the huge tent. Not necessarily. I posed the theory that I'd had earlier, that someone within the ballooning community might not want to see Rachel succeed. He appeared to give that some serious thought and said he'd follow up on it. Drake's coming home tomorrow, and I might be able to press him into service to help us with this. He's never been to Fiesta, and he's eager to get in on it. For now, do you want me to stay at Rachel's again tonight?
Yeah, if you can. I better get back inside and hang close to her. She wants to fly tomorrow. Saturday and Sunday are the two biggest days for this gig. Mass ascensions, huge crowds. I can use your help.
Since taking the dog with us to the field would make life complicated in the morning, I told him I'd run out to Rachel's after the barbecue, get Rusty, and leave him in Elsa's care, and get back to Rachel's for the night. I could go out to the field with the crew in the morning. The logistics of it all reminded me that life would get infinitely more complicated with a child in the picture. Chapter 20. A mass ascension, despite its religious-sounding name, is simply a flight where all balloons take off at once, ascending en masse to fill the sky with color. Albuquerque does this in a way that causes hearts to flutter, jaws to drop, and rolls of film to be shot with amazing rapidity. Of course, more than 600 balloons can't literally take flight at exactly the same moment from an open field, laid out on a grid where roughly 100 can inflate and be ready at one time. The process is done in waves, with skilled launch directors giving the thumbs up to row after row of the huge craft, moving from the downwind edge of the field, allowing each successive row to take flight. By the time the first 100 are airborne, the next wave have inflated and the process starts again. Within about an hour's time, 600 colored globes fill the blue October sky and create a scene most artists and all photographers live for. There's something so vivid, so ethereal about the sight. Maybe it is a religious experience after all. If there's something magical about standing on the ground and gazing at a sky full of color, there's an otherworldly feeling about being up there in the midst of it. Against Grayson's strenuous protests, Rachel informed him that I would be her only passenger this morning. Although Grayson argued for a ride for his important client, Ron pointed out that if something happened during the flight, Grayson wouldn't want to be liable for the man's safety. That settled the question. I'd been able to keep my eyes on the crowd, watching for danger, trying to spot anyone who might somehow show an overt interest in Rachel during the whole process of inflating the balloon and preparing for takeoff. I'd scanned the hordes of people as Rachel beckoned me to climb into the basket with her, and during the fleeting moment when we ceased to feel the ground under our feet, during that amazing moment, I realized we were floating. As the people below us began to fall away, transforming from upturned faces with open mouths to round blobs with dots for features, I have to admit that I couldn't help myself. I just had to take a minute to stare around me. Hundreds of inverted teardrop shapes in every possible color combination hung in the air around us. Whooshing blasts from Lady Liberty's burner occasionally interrupted the same sounds, fainter from others. By the time we climbed to 1,000 feet or so above the ground, we began to move away from the launch field, and I lost the details in people and objects below. This might be the most dangerous time in the flight. I wouldn't be able to spot hidden dangers, but a concealed sniper on the ground with a high-powered rifle could easily sight in on Rachel. She'd given me a quick overview of the burner controls and instruments and the theory behind flying the uncontrollable aircraft. If anything happened to her, I could theoretically take over, but I was far from ready to put that to the test. Rachel's radio crackled and Sam's voice came through.
Rusty 1, Rusty Chase now leaving the field.
Normally, balloons and crews use the balloon's name to communicate on the busy frequencies that are shared by many. Lady Liberty would call out for Liberty Chase, but since announcing our every move could prove fatal in this case, we'd opted for the code word. I thought it funny that Rachel had taken to my lovable pooch so quickly that she'd picked his name. Rusty Chase, 10-4. Looks like we've got a box today.
Saw that. You going with it?
Rachel looked at me and we both shook our heads. The box is an Albuquerque phenomenon where wind currents often flow in exact opposite directions at different altitudes. From the ground up to about 500 feet, they'll be out of the north, taking the balloons due south. Climb to 1,000 feet and you'll head back due north. Come down again to 500 and you're going back south. It's not uncommon to take off, fly for an hour, and land near your starting point. Pilots and crowds both love it. Negative, Sam. Staying high is a better bet. She gave a few more blasts on the burner, and we ascended to 7,500, about 2,000 feet above the ground, well above most of the others in the crowded sky. Better, she announced, taking a deep breath and letting her arm drop from the overhead blast valve she'd been constantly ascending since the flight began. She pulled off one bulky glove and reached into her jacket pocket for a scrap of paper. On it, she jotted down the winds aloft report from the pilot briefing this morning. Looks like we can stay right about here, go north until we get nearly to Tramway, then drop down and find a good open spot. She jammed the note back into her pocket and reached up to hit the blast valve again. If we get too far north, we'll end up having to deal with the Indians. The Sandia Indians own the land north of Tramway Boulevard, where there are few roads and fewer gates, and you don't just fly there casually. It takes a lot of time and some diplomatic talking to retrieve your balloon once you've crossed their fences. They've gotten easier to deal with in recent years, especially if you happen to land near their huge casino. That's one part of the Pueblo land they don't seem to mind sharing. She radioed her intent to Sam. With our present course, she wouldn't have to worry about crossing the Rio Grande, something that gets tricky with the few bridges that lead to the west side. We'd already tracked east of the balloon field, and were about to cross Interstate 25. I spotted the truck as Sam maneuvered through traffic to follow Rachel's directions. Here, want to fly for a while? Rachel asked me, taking my hand and raising it to the overhead blast valve. I think my eyes grew bigger. My piloting experience is strictly limited to very, very controllable helicopters. Come on, it's not hard. Until you get the feel for it, just watch your instruments. She pointed out the altimeter and rate of climb indicator. You know these two guys, right? The only other thing to watch is the envelope temperature. If this little needle goes into the red zone, we'll soon have crispy fabric up there. At the moment, the needle was well below the red line. I stared up into the vast cavern of empty space surrounded by thin nylon, and I swallowed hard. Try it a few times. You'll get the feel of it. I watched the rate of climb meter begin to drop slightly. I pulled tentatively on the burner control, a short blast. We began falling 200 feet a minute, heading toward 300. I overcompensated with a long blast and felt the corresponding rise 30 seconds later. Rachel tapped my elbow, instructing me to quit burning. Before I knew it, we were climbing 300 feet a minute. It's not as easy as you make it look. Stay with it. You'll get it soon. She coached me with hand signals through a few more cycles, letting me know when to burn and when to let off. After 10 or 15 minutes, I began to get the feel for it, although I still didn't dare take my eyes off the instruments. We're getting about to the limit of our northward travel. We'd better come down, track back south a bit, and find a spot. She watched me for a second to check my reaction. Landing? I felt sweaty places forming under the parka that had felt so good at 6 in the pre-dawn chill. I'll take over. She reached for the control, picking up the radio mic and announcing her intention to Rusty Chase. I took off my jacket and stuffed it behind one of the fuel tanks. "That was fun," I said, hoping I sounded sincere. The lack of directional control still bothered me. Rachel brought the balloon down to 200 feet above the ground, her gradual descent a far cry from the hectic up-and-down movements I'd managed. She pointed out a dirt road about a quarter of a mile away in the middle of a patch of sage and chamisa. Housing developments framed the south and west sides of it, and a row of power lines ran along the south edge of the houses. We were now only about 50 feet off the ground. "Won't we?" I eyed the lines, knowing they were the single biggest danger to balloonists, but Rachel became intent on her task. I shut up and watched. She guided the balloon with short bursts of heat and reached out with her free hand to grab the red line that led to the balloon's vent panel. I spotted our chase truck turning onto the road in front of us. "Face forward," Rachel instructed. "Grab the uprights with both hands and hold on. Flex your knees slightly when we touch." She shut off the blast valve and gave the red line a firm tug with both hands. The balloon settled perfectly on the dirt road. Sam had stopped the truck about 10 yards away. The crew piled out and began walking toward us. I noticed Sam staring intently at the envelope above our heads. "What's wrong, Sam?" Rachel called out. He shook his head, but pulled Ron aside and pointed upward. Ron squinted, shielding his eyes from the sun. They spoke a few words, but I couldn't keep up with it. Rachel had shut off the fuel and pulled the rip line, and the big red, white, and blue globe folded inward into a slack mass of fabric as it gave up the bubble of hot air that had held us in the sky. I became busy with trying to stay on my feet as the basket tipped over and we stepped on to terra firma. I grabbed my jacket and remembered belatedly that I'd intended to take pictures with Drake's little digital camera, which hadn't left my pocket once after all. Justin and the other crew members proceeded to pull the fabric taut, retrieve the envelope storage bag, and ready the whole system to be stowed in the truck. I was in the process of checking the pockets of my jacket to be sure I'd not lost any of my belongings, when Ron tapped me on the arm.
"We got problems,"
he murmured, pulling me away from the group. "What?"
"Sam noticed them. Come take a look."
He glanced back toward the crew, who were near the top of the balloon, settling the top deflation panel back in place. Rachel and Sam stood near the mouth of the balloon. He held a section of the fabric up for her to see. Ron nudged me closer to them. Sam held up the fabric, emphasizing a hole about the diameter of his finger.
"There are 4 of them."
"What are they?"
"Bullet holes."
His voice sounded grim. I felt my knees go weak. Chapter 21. I leaned against the side of the wicker gondola. Rachel's face had gone white, and Ron took her arm and hustled her to the truck, tucking her inside the cab and scanning the horizon in every direction.
"When did this happen?"
Sam asked me. I have no idea." My mind whirred back over the past hour.
"Let's get moving," Ron ordered. "They probably watched her land and know exactly where we are." "Guys, double time!"
Sam shouted to the crew members. Luckily, no one questioned. They knew their jobs and began stuffing the hundreds of yards of fabric into the bag. Within minutes, they disconnected the cables and shoved the basket bag and inflator fan into the truck.
"Everyone stay low."
Ron positioned Rachel in the center of the back seat of the truck, as concealed as we could make her. I sat on one side of her, Danny, the crew member, on the other. Sam drove, and Ron rode with Justin in the back of the truck, inside the balloon gondola. Sam gunned the truck a little more than necessary, kicking up a cloud of dust on the road. He found a way into the nearby housing development and took a circuitous route down narrow residential streets. "Where are we going?" Rachel asked, her voice sounding impatient and frightened at the same time.
"Not back to the balloon field,"
Sam said tersely.
"First, we're going to be sure we're not followed. Then we'll get you and the balloon hidden away."
Rachel started to open her mouth again, but I nudged her side. Clearly, Sam didn't want to discuss plans in front of the crew. From my position, I could see his jaw working as he fought back anger. The young crew guys stayed quiet. I glanced back at Ron. He'd pulled down the fluttering banner that identified Lady Liberty and tucked it discreetly away somewhere. As Sam picked up speed, Ron and Justin hunched into the basket, backs against the wind. We wound through another residential neighborhood without anyone apparently tailing us, until we emerged somehow onto Eubank. Sam headed due south, then got onto Interstate 40 and merged east, heading toward the mountains. I looked at Rachel, puzzled that we were apparently leaving town, but didn't say anything. Sam changed lanes frequently, dodging between the big rig truck traffic on the state's heavily traveled main east-west route. He exited 15 minutes later at Tierras and drove another 20 minutes, taking us deep into the mountains on Albuquerque's east side. 2 more roads and a tiny dirt lane later, he eased into a narrow driveway bordered by scrub oak and cedar. Tall ponderosa pines grew thickly over the property. 2 Rottweilers in a fenced run barked furiously, racing back and forth within the confined space. 100 yards away, at the edge of a small meadow, stood a barn. A dozen goats milled around inside a fenced enclosure. Across the driveway from the dog run stood a house with redwood siding, a steeply pitched metal roof of sage green, and a wraparound porch. Barrels of brightly blooming impatiens bordered the steps leading to the front door, and groupings of lawn furniture sat under the high branches of the pines. Sam maneuvered the long pickup within a confined turnaround space and backed it up to a double garage door. He cut the engine and got out. I turned to Rachel. "This is Sam's house. Beautiful spot, huh?" Everyone had piled out of the truck, and Rachel and I followed suit. Ron pulled me aside.
"Didn't get a chance to tell you this before the flight, but we may have another suspect. I spoke with John O'Malley, the FAA designee who's going to be monitoring Rachel's record attempt." He dropped his voice. "He says that another woman also filed paperwork for a record attempt. It's something that has to be done months before the actual flight. Then the pilot has a 3-month window in which to do the flight and have it confirmed. Rachel's at the beginning of her window, October, November, December. The other gal's window runs out the end of this month. Don't know if that means anything. She's not been in the news, and I haven't had a chance to scout around with the ballooning crowd to see what her story is." "Who is it?" "Someone named Elizabeth Pierce." "Liz Pierce? I met her. She's a friend of Rachel's." I tried to assimilate the information. What was going on here? "Meeting," Sam announced, waving everyone over to him. He leaned against one of the huge pines while the group assembled. He cleared his throat for attention. "We had a closer call than I like this morning." The young crew members who hadn't seen the bullet holes looked puzzled. Danny started to open his mouth but settled back. "No disrespect to our—" He started to say bodyguards but changed it quickly. "Friends here, but this is how we're going to do things now." Ron sputtered, but I gripped his hand and dug my nails in. Sam clearly didn't want the entire crew to know the whole story. We should see how he wanted to handle it. "We'll offload the balloon here and put it in the garage. Rachel, Ron, and Charlie will stay here while I drive the guys back to their cars. When I get back, we'll discuss plans and decide how or if tomorrow will happen." Meaning the record attempt. Rachel stirred but kept silent. "I don't want anyone to say anything." He stared at each of the young crew members. "To anybody about this. Not a word about where we've put the balloon, where Rachel is, and what's going on with the record attempt." He met each of our eyes. "No partying tonight, guys." A restless wave flowed through the group. "I mean it. I need you fresh and alert in the morning." "And not out socializing where you're likely to open your mouths." He didn't say it, but they all got it. "We'll be in touch by phone once we finalize the plan."
He gave a little round-em-up signal, and the boys began unloading equipment. Within 5 minutes, everything had been stashed in one side of the double garage.
Ron, on second thought, come with me. My car's still at the field, and I need a second driver.
My brother, who's usually so much the runner of the show, quietly climbed into the truck's shotgun seat.
Charlie, you and Rachel stay inside until we get back. Keep everything locked.
Sam stood beside the truck until Rachel and I went into the house. She made a show of locking the door and giving him an okay sign through the door's upper glass panes before he climbed into the driver's seat. We watched as the truck rolled down the narrow drive. Then everything grew quiet. Rachel, did you know Liz Pierce has also filed for an altitude attempt? What? Clearly this news surprised her. Ron just told me. She must have done it months ago, because her time frame is almost up. She has to do it before the end of this month. She got quiet and turned away from the door. Is there any chance she wants this record bad enough to try to scare you away from it? Oh, surely not. I mean, anyone in the whole country could go for the same one. I could set it first and she could come along and beat me, or vice versa. She said it lightly enough that I felt somewhat reassured. Mind if I scout around? Remote as the place might be, I wouldn't feel entirely at ease until I knew every window and door. Go ahead. I'm going to make a cup of tea. You want one? I followed her down the narrow entry hall that opened into a large, sunny great room. A glance showed the kitchen on the left, a big sunroom on the right, French doors leading to a deck at the back. Done in shades of Wedgwood blue and cream, the living room area featured a huge wraparound sectional sofa, rustic wood coffee table, oak entertainment center, and blue enameled wood-burning stove. To the left, the stairs led to a second story. Beyond them, a well-equipped kitchen with deep blue floor tile and countertops that looked like a chef's dream. A wide counter opened to the dining room portion of the expanse. Oak high-backed stools and the counter provided an informal eating spot, while the dining table stretched the full length of that spacious room, easily seating 8. Rachel filled a large kettle at the kitchen sink and set it on a burner. Black or herbal? She asked, opening the doors on a cleverly hidden pantry. Black. I circled through the kitchen and dining areas, back to the living room. Through the glass doors, I saw a small, cozy deck furnished with a grouping of chairs and a neat little table umbrella arranged for eating outdoors. A large barbecue grill against the wall gave further testimony to the fact that Sam liked to cook. I stepped out to the deck and walked its perimeter. At the far end, it looked into the dining room window. At the opposite end, near the French doors, an opening led out onto a gravel path that circled the house. I stood at the railing a moment and took a deep breath of pine and cedar. Except for the chirping birds and the occasional skittering of a squirrel in the trees, silence enveloped the place. A mere 20 feet from the back of the house, the forest closed in tightly. I followed the gravel path to the right, rounding the corner of the sunroom. Inside, I could clearly see Rachel in the kitchen pulling mugs from a rack. A shiver of apprehension coursed over me. An old phrase about people in glass houses ran through my mind. Beyond the sunroom, the wraparound porch led to the front of the house. I took the 2 wooden steps up and faced another sliding glass door into a room I'd not yet seen. I tried the door and found it locked. Good. Porch furniture and heavy wicker with cushioned seats stood invitingly at the wide corner where the 90-degree angle cut back toward the front door, where we'd first come in. Past that, the double garage doors stood solidly closed. I picked up the gravel path again on the far side of the garage and followed it past the kitchen and dining room windows, back to the French doors where I'd come out. "Tea's ready," Rachel called as I came inside. I took a mug and drifted through the living room. Double doors revealed that the small room I'd noticed from the outside was a study. I'd spotted one telephone in the kitchen, another sat on the desk in here. "What's upstairs?" I asked Rachel. 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. Take a look." I climbed carpeted stairs to a landing where a small bedroom dressed in ruffles and lace looked out over the driveway toward the pen with the Rottweilers. A bathroom on the same level featured a large window that extended from eye level to the ceiling, staring out into the trees. Up another short flight of stairs, the master bedroom looked out over an open railing to the living room below. A doorway led to a small upper deck with a hot tub. A huge pine grew beside it, and I briefly wondered whether it shed needles into the tub every time the cover stood open. A second bath gave pretty much the same view as the first. Pastel wallpaper in shades of lavender and blue, along with framed prints of impressionistic girls in filmy white dresses, gave the room a decidedly feminine tone. I nosed around in the bathroom for a moment, but found only male products, not so much as a pink toothbrush to indicate that Rachel ever spent the night here. "Lots of feminine touches for a guy's house," I commented as I came back downstairs. Rachel had taken a spot on the big cushy sofa, her legs folded under her and her hands wrapped around her mug, using it as a mini heater. "Sam's wife. She died 3 years ago, but aside from giving away her clothes, he apparently hasn't changed a thing." "Must feel kind of strange to you." "Kinda. Guess it's the main reason we haven't moved in together. Living with a ghost in a cozy country-style house just isn't my thing. And Sam loves the mountains and his dairy goats. I can't imagine he'd ever agree to move into the city." I settled onto the sofa, stretching my legs along the opposite length from the big L where she sat. "So does that mean there's no future for you two? I get the feeling Sam really loves you." "He does. I don't doubt that. It's just, I don't know." She drained the last of her tea and got up to pour another cup. "With everything this week, I just can't think about it right now." "Yeah." I had a lot of thinking to do after this week, too. I should have told Drake about my pregnancy suspicions when he called yesterday. I handed my mug over for a refill when she offered. "Rachel, about your father." Dean Patterson's revelations yesterday still preyed on my mind. "I can't, Charlie. I can't even think about him right now." "Even though we know he didn't send the—" I jumped when the phone rang.
"I tried your cell, but it says you're out of the area,"
Ron said when Rachel handed the phone over to me.
"Guess the mountains or the trees are interfering with the signal."
"So, what's the plan now?"
"Sam and I are going to run by the office. I had a couple more computer checks in the works, and I want to see if the information has come in. We want to stay clear of the balloon field for a couple more hours anyway. Then we'll get Sam's car and come back out there. After that, we'll see."
I walked out to the back deck, taking the conversation out of Rachel's earshot. "Are you guys planning for all of us to spend the night out here? This house is so isolated, sure, but if anyone finds out where we are, it's a security nightmare. There's not a drape or window shade in the place, and even the second-floor rooms are easily accessible." He pondered that for a minute.
"Guess we'll have to figure something out. Look, it's coming up on noon. I'll give you a call when we get ready to head back that direction. Scout around a little and see if you can map out an exit strategy."
Lucky me. I'm an accountant. What do I know about exit strategies? I carried the silent phone receiver back inside and locked the door behind me. Rachel had burrowed into the soft cushions on the big sectional and was dozing soundly. I crossed quietly to the stairs and went up to the front bedroom, the ruffled one. Its large windows overlooked the driveway and dog run. The 2 Rottweilers paced along the fence between their water tub, near the house, and the front property line. By positioning myself at the left edge of the window, I had a clear view down the driveway, nearly to the gate. Using this as a lookout point, we could easily know when anyone tried to approach the house, at least by the conventional method. I decided to walk down and see if Sam had closed the gate. Anyone who wanted to drive up to the house would manage to set off the dogs before they got close to us. Rachel looked so peaceful on the sofa as I walked downstairs and let myself out. I wished I could relax enough to take a nap, too, but felt too keyed up at this point. I walked most of the 200 yards to the gate before I realized that it was already closed. The 2 dogs trotted parallel to the drive, keeping wary eyes on me, but seemingly accepting of the fact that I came here as an invited guest. I examined the gate. It had only a standard latch, no chain or padlock. It certainly wasn't going to keep anyone out. The fence, except for the dog's enclosure, consisted of regular 3-strand barbed wire, fine for keeping cows and horses in their rightful places, but useless against most anything else. Sam had said that the property was 5 acres. Knowing that a person could get through this fence at any point didn't do a lot to reassure me. I could only hope that our security lay in secrecy. No one had any reason to think they could find Rachel here. No one except her 6 crew members, anyone they might ask or speak to, or God only knew how many people who knew where Sam lived. Yeah, reassuring. I trekked back to the house where I rechecked all the doors and windows before taking up a post in a rocking chair near the front window in the upstairs bedroom. The next thing I knew, I was pulling myself out of a groggy sleep. For precious minutes, I drifted between the uncertainty of my location and the leaden feeling that I couldn't drag myself up from the depths of sleep. A stealthy sound of metal on metal came from somewhere within the house, and I scrubbed at my eyelids with sandpapery fingertips to force them open. Sam's house. Clarity came in a flash. I stood up too fast and had to grip the arm of the rocker to keep my balance. After a minute, I stepped out to the landing and scanned the lower floor. Rachel no longer lay on the sofa, and I began to pick up the tiny sound of someone puttering in the kitchen. Pan against burner, the tinny clink of flatware in a drawer. "Oh, there you are," she said as I walked into the kitchen. "Hungry?" "What time is it?" I couldn't even begin to remember when I'd last eaten. "Nearly 4. She'd opened a can of soup and proceeded to pour it into a saucepan. "I must have slept 3 hours. 3 hours in a chair, which no doubt accounted for the nagging crick in my neck. I rubbed at it as I watched her move about the kitchen. Outside, the light had taken on a golden glow as the sun lowered in the sky. Bars of light scored the upper reaches of the living room walls and threw umber streaks across the pine tongue-and-groove ceiling. I strolled to the windows in the sunroom, noticing that the ground around the house was entirely in shadow. "What's the word from the guys? They should be getting here any minute, shouldn't they?" "They haven't called. I tried to call Sam's cell, but it didn't work. Oops!" She dashed to the range top, where bubbling soup threatened to flow over the top of the pan. She grabbed the pan and switched off the burner in one deft move. "I hope you like minestrone, and I hope you like it hot." I took a seat at one end of the oak bar stools where she'd laid out 2 place settings on the counter. "Sounds great to me." She passed a plate of garlic bread she'd magically produced from somewhere. The smells of spicy soup and fragrant bread caused a rumble in my stomach, and I didn't waste any time. Not another word passed between us for at least 10 minutes. "More?" she asked, carrying her bowl to the stove. "No, thanks. I'm doing great." Now that my hunger pangs were subsiding, I'd begun to wonder again about Ron and Sam. My brother isn't always the best at checking in with me, but he'd said he would call before they left town. On the other hand, he's notorious for getting into the middle of a computer search and losing all track of time. Maybe I better nudge him. "You tried Sam's phone. Maybe I should try Ron's." I picked up the cordless handset, punching the familiar numbers. Not getting anything," I muttered. She set her spoon down and wiped her mouth with a napkin. "That's what I started to tell you. It didn't work." Trickles of dread edged up my forearms. "I thought you meant Sam's cell phone didn't work." "No, this phone didn't work. The line seems dead." Chapter 22. My soup threatened a return visit. I dropped the telephone on the counter. "Rachel, why didn't you tell me this immediately?" My voice came out high and edgy. Do you think—" The color had gone out of her face. I dashed up the stairs and posted myself at the edge of the front window. The shadowy driveway looked the same as before. One of the dogs was asleep at the door of their wooden doghouse. The other must be near the front of the property. My pulse slowed a tad. Surely they wouldn't be so completely unconcerned if a stranger had come anywhere near the house. "Charlie." Rachel stood tentatively at the bedroom door. I spun around at the sound of her voice. "There doesn't seem to be anything out of place outside." "Look, I'm sorry. I didn't panic because the phones up here are always acting up. Electricity, too. They're out for a while, then they come back on." That knowledge reassured me somewhat, but I didn't like the feeling of being so cut off. No cell service, no regular phone service either. "Is it chilly in here?" I asked as we walked back down the stairs. Outside the wide sunroom windows, the shadows had deepened, giving the forest a dull gray, old black-and-white movie feel. I considered what would happen when it truly became dark. The minute we switched on lights inside the house, the outdoors would feel even darker, and we'd be as exposed as fish in an aquarium. "I'll get some wood for the fire." "Where is it?" She gave me a funny look. "The firewood, where is it kept?" "There's a stack at the side of the driveway, near the dog run, and there's more in the garage." "Get it from the garage." I watched her unlock the door in the kitchen that led down the steep flight of stairs. "We better round up some flashlights. Where are they?" Let me think." Distracted from the garage mission, she turned to begin rummaging through kitchen drawers. "Here's one, and I think Sam has more on his workbench. Grab as many as you can find before you worry about the wood. Batteries, too." I made the rounds of all the doors and windows again, paranoidly rechecking locks. I couldn't imagine that I'd slept so soundly that I wouldn't have heard someone tampering with them, especially since the dogs would have surely barked. But I didn't place too much trust in the idea that the phones being out of order was mere coincidence either. "Charlie! Charlie, quick!" Rachel's voice came as a muted shout, far within the depths of the garage, as I'd just finished checking the lock on the upstairs balcony door leading to the hot tub. I raced through the master bedroom, down the 2 sets of stairs, and into the kitchen. She met me at the top of the garage stairs. "You didn't go down there and do anything with the balloon, did you?" "No. What's happened?" I nearly shoved her down the stairs as we hurried back down. At the far side of the garage stood the wicker gondola, the inflator fan, and box of accessories, just as the crew had left them. But the heavy canvas bag sat away from the other items, the top cinch strap undone, spilling red, white, and blue fabric onto the floor. "The crew didn't leave it like this. I know they didn't." "No, I'm sure you're right." I looked around the open bag, noticing scuffed footprints in the dust on the concrete floor. Then something gleamed in the glow of the overhead bulb. I knelt to check it out. A knife. My hand reached toward it, but pulled back. Fingerprints. My automatic response kicked in. "Rachel," I waved her over. "Recognize this?" She knelt beside me and stared at the shiny blade. It looked like a hunting knife, perhaps, with a nicely carved wooden handle and a wickedly curving inch-wide blade that gleamed in its sharpness. "No, I've never seen Sam carry anything like this." "We better leave it here until Ron can take a look. Maybe he can get prints off it." "What's it doing here?" "Charlie, what's happening?" She'd unconsciously moved over to the balloon bag and began caressing the fabric of Lady Liberty. "Looks to me like someone intended to damage the balloon to keep you from making your flight tomorrow." "But—" She didn't have to say it. We were both wondering who knew the balloon was here, in this garage, and how had they gotten in. I tugged upward on each of the garage doors, testing, but they were both firmly in place. Then I noticed a small side door that must lead outdoors. I crossed to it and quickly tried the knob. The one door in the whole place I'd not checked, and it was unlocked. Shit. I yanked it open and stepped out onto the pale green gravel path. It stretched on my left into the driveway, and to my right it passed the kitchen window, and eventually wound around the back deck. Ahead of me a small clearing contained a tire swing and a wooden picnic table, barely visible now in the fading light. Beyond that, the forest had become thick and black. "I don't see any damage," Rachel said as I stepped back inside and carefully twisted both the deadbolt and the lock on the doorknob. She stood over the canvas bag and had pulled out several more yards of fabric. She was running her hand over the panels, one at a time. Why, I wondered. If someone had gotten this far, standing over the balloon, knife in hand, it could only mean that we'd somehow interrupted them in the act. Perhaps with Rachel and me asleep, they hadn't realized anyone was home. They could have fled when they heard clattering pans in the kitchen. But wouldn't they have made a few decisive cuts in the nylon before they ran? The thought that Rachel had frightened the intruder away just now, when she switched on the garage light to go for the firewood, was way too close for comfort. We better have a weapon, and I remembered with a sinking feeling that I'd left my gun with my things at Rachel's house. A fine bit of planning. I found an old towel on Sam's workbench and tacked it over the half-panel window on the side door. We were now in the only place in the house where I didn't feel the eyes of the outside world could see us. "We may have to spend the night here, in the garage," I told her, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. "Does Sam have any guns?" I'm not sure," she said, matching my tone. I strode to the spot where the knife lay. Screw fingerprints. At this point, we had to think about defending ourselves. I picked it up and looked it over. On closer inspection, I saw that the blade could be folded into the handle. A small button released it. Another catch extended the blade, whipping it into working position with a suddenness that startled me. I practiced working the mechanism several times until I'd figured out the right way to hold it without danger of taking off 3 fingers as I did so. Folded, it didn't feel quite so deadly, and I slipped it into my jeans pocket. "I think we can safely leave the garage light on, but nothing in the house, not even a nightlight. Once it's completely dark outside, we can't afford it." I figured that gave us about another 30 or 45 minutes of half-light before we'd risk stumbling around and breaking our necks on some random piece of furniture. We'd better round up some food, warm clothes, and any weapons we can find. What's going on with Sam and Ron? Why aren't they back by now? Yeah, well, I wanted those answers too, especially since my loving brother had gone off, leaving the two of us miles from anywhere with no vehicle, no working telephone, no weapon, and not a hell of a lot of hope. I indulged in a short fantasy about wringing his neck before I roused Rachel into action. "We better plan for this night on our own. If they get back, great. If not, well, we better be ready." If there's anything I can't stand, it's a helpless female who goes frantic in the face of danger. A hysterically screaming woman brings out in me the urge to slap. Fortunately, Rachel wasn't that woman, and I gained a small measure of confidence when I watched her go into action. "Okay, then. There's some sleeping bags on the shelf out here. We'll find them in a minute. I'll get extra blankets and pillows. I know where they are in the house." She caught my expression. "Well, we might as well be comfortable, right?" "Where would I find winter jackets? Bedroom closets?" "Probably." "What about a gun?" I asked the question without much hope. She'd already become fuddled with that one. "Never mind. I'll look around. You gather some food, anything we don't have to cook." "Got it." We started up the garage stairs cautiously. A spring closer had snapped the heavy door solidly closed when I came down, and I couldn't hear a thing on the other side. I pulled out the hunting knife and snapped it open. One couldn't be too careful. I drew the door open as quietly as possible and scanned the great room. Nothing looked out of place. Rachel followed me, and we assessed the situation like a special forces team entering enemy territory. Once we'd ascertained that we were alone, she took the kitchen and I headed upstairs. Where does a guy hide a gun? Near his bedside, if I learned anything from my months of firearms discussions with Drake. I headed for the master bedroom and went for the side of the bed nearest the bathroom. That bit of reasoning doesn't need explanation for anyone, does it? The nightstand yielded nothing but a paperback book on top, a nail clipper, box of condoms, and 2 issues of Playboy in the drawer. Those and the pair of dirty socks in the open space beneath the drawer convinced me that Sam was 100% normal guy. So where did he keep the weapon? Patting the carpet under the edge of the bed, at least as far as my forearm would go, netted one more pair of dirty socks and about 45 dust balls, although I didn't stop to count them. The fact that I even took time to wonder about it was surely a sign that the tension was getting to me. I brushed my arm off on the bedspread. Hey, it was Sam's fault I was having to do this anyway, and began a pat-down of the pillows. I had to give Sam credit in the vigilance department. The gun was under the pillow on the other side of the bed, positioned so he could merely stretch in his sleep and put his right hand on it. Unfortunately, I had to mark him down for lack of firepower. The pistol was a .22 revolver, and of the 6 potential shots it offered, only 3 were left. He'd be lucky to kill a cat with those teeny bullets, much less a full-sized human being. But one never knows. If my life depended on it, at close range and with the right angle, I might use the thing. I stuck it into my waistband, berating myself again for not bringing my Beretta. I'd hoped that the nightstand on the other side of the bed might offer up additional ammunition, but no such luck, so I went on to the closet. I debated breaking the restriction about turning on lights, but a quick glance told me that at least 4 windows would expose me to anyone lurking outside. I pawed around the upper shelf in hopes that a box of .22 shells would fall into my hand, but that didn't work. So warm clothing. I knew Rachel pictured a cozy pajama party with our sleeping bags on the floor while we munched popcorn and cookies all night, but I had a feeling that the reality might involve more. I wanted a heavy coat and warm boots if I could find them. Mountain temperatures in the autumn could likely fall into the 30s, possibly even the 20s, not even a place to be overnight in your street clothes. My hands came across the reassuring feel of a sheepskin jacket, and I pulled it off its hanger. If it came right down to it, I knew I'd offer Rachel the heavy coat, so I better find 2 of them. No other sheepskins offered themselves up, but I did find another roomy parka whose fabric felt like that of windproof all-weather stuff, and the padding seemed adequate. "Charlie?" Rachel's voice came tentatively up the stairs in the dark. "In the main bedroom." I heard her feeling her way up the remaining steps. "I've put a bag full of snacks beside the garage door, and here are some gloves that I found on top of the fridge." I showed her the 2 coats, which she inspected mostly by feel. I also told her about finding the pistol, but didn't elaborate on its inadequacies. We'd deal with that if the occasion arose. We edged our way back down the 2 short flights of stairs. The light at the windows now consisted of barely discernible gray rectangles, another thing you never realize when you live in the city. Just how dark absolute dark really is. We'd left the light on in the garage, which I now realized was about to be a big liability. There would be that moment in time when we'd exposed ourselves and our plan by opening it and heading down the stairs. "Where's the switch to the garage light?" "Top of the stairs. I think it's a foot or 2 away from the door jamb." "Okay, here's what we'd better do. Open the door as little as you can and get your hand through. Reach through and switch off the light as fast as possible." She followed instructions well, and I could only hope that whoever had come in once had either left the property entirely or hadn't been near the back of the house where he'd easily observed our moves. "Now take the food sack with you and feel your way down 3 steps. That should give me room to get in." I edged the toes of my right foot over the step, then 2 more times, then pushed the heavy door closed. The light nearly blinded me when I hit the switch, but at least we didn't have to keep feeling our way down the steep stairs. Rachel, in true pajama party fashion, proceeded to build us a cozy nest. She located some thick waterproof tarps and spread them out, followed this with blankets — I had no idea where those came from — then the sleeping bags, pillows, and our sacks of munchies. I half expected her to pull out fuzzy pink jammies with feet and begin to change into them. "Can you work by flashlight? I'm not sure we should have the bright light on." I'd been in here less than 10 minutes and was already anxious about what might be happening outside. "Sure." I switched off the overhead light and risked lifting one corner of the towel I'd tacked over the one window. The view showed me absolutely nothing. Pitch dark. I dropped to the curtain and joined Rachel on the pile of bedding. Cold had begun to seep through my jeans, so I wrapped the insulated bulk of a sleeping bag over my lap. Cracker Jack? One of my favorites. I rummaged through the provisions and also discovered 2 packages of cookies and a large, airy bag of cheesy popcorn. Anything to drink with these? A blank look came over her face, and I could see an uh-oh forming. Oh, wait, there are sodas out here. She made her way over to the stairs, where cases of pop were stacked in an alcove. Room temperature, but better than nothing. She brought each of us a canned Coke. I surveyed my supplies, making sure I could locate things on a moment's notice. The cell phone in my purse still registered at no signal, which didn't come as any surprise, and the portable phone from the house was still dead. I visualized Ron calling and getting no answer. He would know something was wrong, round up extra help, and be on his way this very minute. Any time now, we'd hear vehicles pulling into the driveway, and we'd all spend the rest of the evening laughing over this. Except that Ron and Sam should have been back hours ago. The dog should have raised a ruckus when someone entered the garage, and the feel of that folding knife still lay heavy in my pocket. Nothing about this whole situation felt right. Another hour passed. No vehicles arrived, and we'd run out of small talk. Rachel wandered over to the stack of equipment she'd accumulated for her altitude flight. Parachute, oxygen tank and mask, super thermal flight suit. She checked everything, I imagined, for the 100th time, then drifted back to the sleeping bags, pulled off her shoes, and burrowed into the downy cocoon. Despite the afternoon nap, I also felt my eyelids getting heavy. I allowed them to close for just a second. The sound, when it came, was tiny. The merest scrape of something on gravel. The smallest metallic chink as the doorknob twisted. In my half-sleep state, it could have been part of a dream. I roused slightly. Every bit of sleep left me in the next second, though, as the door's glass panel crashed inward. Chapter 23. Rachel let out a little shriek and sat up, pulling her covers tightly around her shoulders. A dozen thoughts flew through my mind, from defending ourselves with the 3 shots left in the .22, to close combat with a knife, to getting the hell out. The latter seemed like the best choice. The flashlight beam swung wildly as I thrashed against my sleeping bag restraint. "We gotta get out," I rasped. "Grab the coats." I retucked the gun into my waistband and patted my pocket where the knife lay. "And your shoes." Something in the back of my mind told me we should be quiet, not let the intruder realize he'd nearly caught us. But the reality wasn't so easy to achieve. Rachel crashed into the paper bag of food as she lunged for the jackets, and I nearly went headlong across the room when I stepped on the cylindrical metal flashlight, and it rolled. Shadows rose and fell like malevolent spirits against the walls. A gloved hand came through the broken window pane and patted the doorframe in search of the knob. "Quick, up the stairs!" I called to Rachel in a stage whisper. She bolted, arms full of sheepskin, her shoes dangling in her right hand. I followed right on her heels. The abandoned flashlight cast most of its light toward the workbench on the opposite wall, giving the stairwell only the slightest dim gray illumination. "It's locked from the inside?" Her voice edged toward hysterics. "What? How had that happened?" I heard the knob downstairs rattle. No time to think. I ripped the pistol from my waistband and faced the door. "Move over," I ordered. Her eyes grew wide at the sight of the gun, and she pressed herself against the wall. I aimed at the lock and pulled the trigger. Shards of metal flew outward. I felt flecks of it hit my face. Male voices cursed downstairs, closer now. I yanked the door open and shoved Rachel through. "Go for the back door." She dashed through the dark house, fumbled momentarily with the lock on the door, and flung it open. I followed her tracks, doing my best not to stumble over furniture in the unfamiliar place. Behind me, I heard heavy feet on the garage stairs. A second person pounded on the front door. Rachel paused on the deck, waiting for me to catch up. "Go! Go!" I shouted. "There's at least 2 of them." She leaped the deck railing and bolted for the woods. The hillside climbed steeply. I barely managed to keep her in sight as I followed. At one point, my foot dislodged a rock, and I went down hard on one knee. Pain shot up my leg, but the sounds of the 2 men on the deck spurred me on. Rachel raced over an unseen path, Thick layers of pine needles and brown oak leaves coated the ground and obscured all tracks. I followed faint white movements and realized she was running over the rocky ground in her socks. We covered a couple 100 feet before she slowed. I looked back and couldn't see the house at all. "I've got to put shoes on," Rachel said, huffing to catch her breath. She sat down and brushed spiky needles from her socks. I kept watch below as she tugged her shoes on and quickly tied them. "Here, take a coat. I'll move faster if I'm not carrying them." I reached for the parka. "Which direction are we heading?" "Right now, basically east. Sam's land extends up here quite a ways. In fact, there's a gazebo on the highest point." "But if we're going to get back to the city, we need to go west, don't we?" "Eventually. For now, maybe we can just get to the road that runs north and south. There's traffic there, and more houses." A flashlight beam bobbed below. As much as I wished we had brought one, at this point it would be a liability. Too easy for the enemy to keep track. Rachel spotted the light and took off again. It took all my concentration to keep up. Without her white socks leading me, my only guide was the pale brown collar of the sheepskin coat. I lost all sense of direction as we wound over the twisty trail. 5 or 10 minutes went by before she paused again. Minutes of steep climbing that left my leg muscles throbbing. "Breathe, Charlie," she said, watching me huff my way up the final 3 feet. "Altitude. Yeah, gets to you, huh?" With my blood pumping in noisy rushes through my eardrums, and my breathing sounding like gusts of strong wind, I barely heard her. My body was warm in the heavy coat, but my hands felt like ice. I felt better when I noticed that she, too, was breathing hard. We sat for a minute, scanning the hillside for light or movement. Nothing. "I think we can head downhill now," Rachel said. "Wait a sec. I think I heard." I let my whisper trail away. A twig snapped, closer than I liked. I clapped a hand over my mouth to hush my heavy breathing. Unfortunately, I couldn't silence my pounding heart.
"Did you see which way they went?"
The male voice huffed roughly, his breath coming in ragged bursts.
"No,"
the second male puffed.
"I think we lost them."
"Shit!" Leaves crackled and pine branches swished in the air. 2 heavy bodies settled onto the ground somewhere on the other side of a huge boulder, probably no more than 20 feet away.
"Gotta catch my breath,"
one of them said. I glanced uphill at Rachel and saw the whites of her wide eyes in the dark. I blinked twice at her, and she blinked once in response. 5 minutes of grunts and groans and shuffling dry ground matter followed.
"Shit, this ain't worth it,"
the first man said, once he could speak again.
"My best knife gone. Now I'm sitting out here in the middle of the piss-off nowhere, in freezing-ass cold."
The other man grumbled something sympathetic sounding in response.
"I'm heading back,"
voice one said again.
"You coming?"
A flashlight switched on and swung over the downhill terrain. I held my breath. One swing up the hill and we'd be spotted. Our luck held as the 2 men stood up and began following the beam back down the hill. Once the beam was out of sight, Rachel reached over and squeezed my arm. "Do we dare go back to the house?" "I don't think so. If that guy dropped his knife, he's still got intentions of damaging your balloon. We don't have any backup or sufficient weapons to take on 2 of them." A pained look crossed her face at the mention of the balloon, but she saw the wisdom of letting go in favor of staying alive. "Can you find a way out of here that doesn't take us near the house?" "Yeah, I'm pretty sure." She found an opening in the forest that headed downhill, and I followed. Sooner than I would have expected, we came to the barbed wire fence with the road on the other side. I held the upper strand for Rachel, and she did the same for me once she'd crawled through. "There are several houses along this road. Maybe we can find someone home and use a phone." Wondering where our 2 pursuers had parked, I motioned Rachel to the edge of the dirt road. Out here, with a little more open space overhead, The glow from the city gave enough light to ease navigation. "There's a house on the right, the Farnsworths, but I think Sam said they were out of town. We'll see. Otherwise, we may have to go another mile or so." I didn't say anything, but was secretly glad when lights appeared a few dozen yards away. My legs felt like mush spread with Jell-O. A small cabin sat in a clearing, light shining in several of the windows, and a white pickup truck beside it. I felt tears prickle at my eyelids. A phone, a cup of hot cocoa, the familiar sound of Ron's voice. I began to visualize ahead to being able to sleep in my own bed, make love to my husband, and hug my dog. My legs picked up the pace. Rachel and I nearly raced each other to the front door. She got there first and pounded on the door.
"Hello, Rachel."
We both spun to find ourselves facing the heavy-set man who'd just come down from the mountainside. "Kevin?" Rachel's face registered total confusion. "What?" My brain tried to fix itself around the situation. Kevin Pierce.
"Come inside, ladies. I'm sure you're cold."
He opened the cabin's door and politely pointed the way. Rachel stepped inside without question. I started to turn away, but the second man stood right at my side. He smelled of sweat, and his thinning black hair revealed dots of perspiration on the top of his shiny head. He gently took my elbow and spun me toward the door. The place was much more rustic than Sam's, a cabin instead of a house. One main room served as living, dining, and kitchen, with a daybed along one wall. 2 doors led away, probably to a bedroom and a bath. A fireplace made of river stones dominated one of the short walls of the rectangular structure. I spotted a set of fireplace tools with a stack of newspapers beside them. A mantel contained several candles and an oil lamp, presumably of use during those frequent power outages Rachel had told me about. A yellow plaid sofa and 2 orange armchairs pretty well filled the place furniture-wise.
"Roger was just about to put some coffee on,"
Kevin said.
"Weren't you?"
The man called Roger nodded but didn't move. "Kevin, what are you doing here? The Farnsworths are on vacation, aren't they? Why are you in their house?" He'd crossed the room to the sofa where 2 jackets lay in a pile. He didn't answer Rachel's question, but rummaged in a pocket for a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. I piped up. "I think the more important question is, why were you at Sam's place a little while ago?" Rachel gave a little gasp. "How did you find us there?" Rare is the criminal who can resist bragging a bit.
"Liz told me. Didn't you notice Beauty's beast flying near you today? She radioed me your landing spot, and a few minutes later told me that your guys were hustling to pack everything into the truck. I told her to fly higher and report. So she was able to tell me that Sam drove through a bunch of residential neighborhoods, then south on Eubank. By the time you turned on to I-40, it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you'd head to Sam's place."
It hit me that Liz had mentioned their previous visit for a barbecue. "And you're certainly no rocket scientist," Rachel said. "But why?" Kevin's face hardened as he lit his cigarette.
"Dear ladies, it's too bad you put all this together. My original goal was to simply scare you away from making your world record attempt, Rachel. The letters and shots at your balloon were supposed to make you hang it all up, but you didn't. You, with the best equipment, the money behind you, and that smart-ass Sam to help you cash in on it." He focused on his friend. "Where's that coffee, Roger?" Roger finally left my side and headed for the small kitchen alcove. He pulled a coffee maker from one corner of the countertop and began opening random cabinets in search of supplies. I edged an inch closer to the door, while Kevin's attention strayed. "But no, you couldn't just give up the record so my wife could take it. No, you had to keep up the brave face. All that publicity, all those reporters fawning over you."
"Liz wanted the record that much?" I edged another inch closer to the door.
Do you honestly think she would have beaten you with that crappy balloon of ours with no oxygen equipment?
Well, sure. Why not? I mean, I don't have any claim on it. Anyone can file the paperwork and make the attempt. Even if I do attempt it, there's no guarantee I'll actually get it. I edged another inch closer to the door. Unfortunately, this time Kevin noticed me. When I looked up, he held a gun. A lot bigger gun than my measly .22.
Let's get right to it. You're not going out there tomorrow, Rachel. You didn't make the choice yourself, so I'm making it for you. Roger, skip the coffee. Find me a good place to stash these two.
Roger, good little gopher that he was, left the kitchen and began to explore the rest of the cabin. I realized as he went around switching on lights that the two of them must have only discovered the place minutes before Rachel and I arrived. They'd probably parked their truck in front of the dark cabin, rather than driving it all the way to Sam's. Then they'd gotten in somehow and turned on a few lights to make the truck seem like it belonged.
Ladies, take off your coats,
Kevin ordered. The gun convinced us to comply.
The bathroom looks good, Roger reported. No windows, not much way to get into trouble. Good. Secure that one first,
Kevin said, giving a nod in my direction. The shorter man pawed through a few kitchen drawers until he came up with a ball of twine. He twirled out a couple of feet of it and cut it with a kitchen knife. I felt my nose wrinkle as the stench of unwashed clothes and sweaty armpits came nearer. Before he could direct me to put my hands behind my back, I held them out in front. Any little advantage, I figured. He doubled the twine and wound it tightly at my wrists. No sailor, clearly. He yanked 3 granny knots into the rough string before turning to the second part of his assignment. I cringed as he raised my shirt to find the gun in my waistband.
Nice view, but get on with it.
Roger patted my pockets, all of them, then thrust his hand into the one where I'd stashed the knife.
Look what I found,
he said to Kevin as he slowly rubbed his palm against my thigh. I came seriously close to kneeing him, but realized that would only serve to remind him that he hadn't tied my feet. I gritted my teeth instead and actually looked forward to being locked in the bathroom.
Ah, my knife. You know this thing's real dear to me. You would have been in lots of trouble if I hadn't gotten it back.
Like we weren't already. Roger, meanwhile, moved on to Rachel and gave her the same tying and frisking treatment. She came closer to actually kicking him, but he'd already given her a shove toward the open bathroom door and didn't notice. Kevin waved the gun to show me that I better follow quietly, so I did. The bathroom was pretty bare bones. Molded fiberglass tub shower with plastic curtain, white porcelain toilet with a few chips in the lid, a similarly chipped white sink hanging from the wall. Decoration consisted of 2 blue towels and a walnut-framed mirror. Geez, where did these people keep their stuff? Doesn't everyone own toothbrushes, pill bottles, and general junk? Roger gave each of us a ceremonial shove to assert his authority, but conveniently forgot to tie our legs. He only seemed to realize afterward that locking us in would prove tricky since the door opened inward and only locked from our side. We heard him asking Kevin how he could rig the door to keep us in, but the conversation degenerated as they walked away. For good measure, I reached out and flipped the little button on the knob. A swift kick or a plastic card would easily get past it, but we'd made our statement. I pressed my ear to the door and discerned that the men were back to the task of brewing coffee. My stomach growled as the smell of it began to come our way, but I told myself to get over it. Life was a little more complicated right now than what a good cup of coffee would fix. "What are we going to do?" Rachel whispered. She'd lowered the lid on the toilet seat, commandeering the best seat in the place. I moved away from the door and perched on the edge of the tub. "I guess that depends on what they do. Maybe they only want to be sure you don't fly tomorrow. If we're lucky, they'll finish their coffee and go home. We can figure a way out of here once we know they aren't watching anymore." "Should we start untying these things?" she asked, holding out her hands. "Let's wait. Unless we can manage to yank that sink off the wall, We don't have much in the way of weapons in here.
Of course, I could towel whip them.
Better let them think we're being submissive unless we find out how far they're willing to go. That coffee's making me hungry. What time is it?
I couldn't pull up my sleeve and angle my watch to face toward myself one-handed, so I held it out toward her.
9? That's it. It feels like 3 in the morning, doesn't it?
The news heartened me somewhat. I kept holding out hope that Ron and Sam had merely met with some delay, or maybe they'd stopped for pizza at a place with incredibly slow service. They'd surely show up any time. But where? There was no reason on earth to think they'd look for us in this cabin.
So, what are our escape options? Give me some ideas. They fall asleep, we unlock the door and walk out?
That'd be nice, but I wouldn't count on it.
They leave, we unlock the door and walk out?
Yeah, right. Roger's not the brightest bulb in the chandelier, but even he's going to figure out that they have to barricade this door.
We get our hands free and wait until we hear them starting to nail the door shut or whatever they're going to do. Before they actually nail it, we open it from our side, kick them in the balls, and run for it. Well, I like that one better.
I had to smile at the image. Rachel sniffed at the air.
Now I think I smell steak. You don't think they'll actually hang around and cook a great dinner right here in front of us, do you?
That truly was a depressing thought. I calculated that our shared can of soup must have been eaten 5 or 6 hours ago, and we'd not even made a dent in the cookies and other goodies that now lay scattered on the garage floor at Sam's. My stomach growled, and Rachel looked at me with a grin. A new noise came from the other side of the door, something scraping across the wooden floor. I closed my eyes to visualize what it could be. Furniture, maybe? Something large and heavy. The scrapes approached our door, becoming loud. They were planning to block us in with something, but I couldn't envision what would work. The sofa was big, but we'd simply climb out over it. The daybed, perhaps? I waited until I heard them move away, and I twisted the lock button and turned the knob slowly. Something large and wooden filled the doorway almost completely.
"What's that?"
I whispered to Rachel. She peeked and backed away.
"Careful, here they come."
I eased the door closed and relocked it.
"So, what do you think? I don't remember anything that big in the cabin."
She sat again and thought.
"The gun cabinet. I think Mr. Farnsworth had a gun cabinet in the bedroom."
I considered that. If the 2 men could push it into place, surely Rachel and I could push it away, couldn't we? That's when I realized the steak Rachel smelled was really smoke. Chapter 24. Rachel apparently realized the implications about the same time I did. Her eyes grew wide and she began picking at the knots on her restraints with her teeth.
"Wait, that's not going to work,"
I said, realizing that wet twine would only form tighter knots.
"Let's see if we can untie each other."
After a couple of fumbling minutes in which neither of us accomplished anything, I decided to hold still and merely let her work on my wrists. She picked at the knots with her short nails and slowly managed to loosen one small loop. At this rate, it would take forever. I looked around the tiny room for an idea. Any sharp object would do, but the place was filled with nice, soft objects like towels and smooth ones like porcelain. Meanwhile, I could hear the 2 men moving another large object.
"Right here,"
Kevin grunted.
"Spread the stuff on the couch and let's get out of here."
The pungent odor of lighter fluid trickled under the closed door.
"We're never going to get untied. We better try to push our way through."
I opened the bathroom door again, in time to hear the front door of the cabin slam shut.
"They're gone. We've got to hurry." We both crowded into the narrow doorway and put our shoulders to the high wooden cabinet. It shuddered but didn't move. Again, same result. I stepped back to assess the situation. The door frame was only a couple of inches wider than the cabinet. No way to squeeze past it. Through the crack, I spotted a touch of yellow. The men had pushed the sofa against the cabinet, effectively making an impenetrable barrier. Smoke began to drift around the edges of the doorframe, and a peek at the top of it told me that the ceiling of the main room was becoming murky. I pulled Rachel away from the door and slammed it. "Wet those towels." We were going to have to think of something else. As we stuffed the sopping material around the base of the door, wedging it as tightly closed as possible, I considered our options. There were none. In an hour or so, someone would notice the flames and report the cabin fire. A volunteer fire department from somewhere miles away would find the place engulfed and do their best to keep the rest of the forest from going with it. If there was anything left of the 2 charred bodies, no one would know who they were because the cabin's owners were out of town. When Rachel and I never showed up again, Ron or Sam might think to investigate the chance that our dental work might match up. I felt despair wash over me. I hadn't seen Drake in nearly a week. He didn't even know that we might have made a baby. I didn't want it to end like this. Drake. He'd never just sit by and wait to be burned up. He'd fight to the last second, with his last scrap of energy. I owed it to him to at least die trying. Rachel sat on the floor with her head in her hands. "This is bullshit! They're not getting us!" Burning anger replaced the lethargy that had nearly taken me. She looked up. "A woman's strength is in her hips and her legs. We've been wasting our time trying to move the thing with our upper bodies. Grab a towel." We pressed the wet towels to our faces and opened the door again. The smoke immediately rushed into the bathroom. "Let's try to budge one edge of it," I shouted through my soggy mask. "Lie down." We wedged our shoulders against the far wall, our feet against the stubborn cabinet. With both our strength, a concerted shove moved the object an inch. "Yes! Do it again!" A count of 3 and another shove gave us 2 more inches. Twice more, and we had a gap of a little over 6 inches to work with. "How skinny can you make yourself?" Rachel asked. "I think we can do it. Keep the towel over your face." We jumped up. Rachel was shorter than me, but slightly heavier in the hips. I pushed her forward to go first. She wriggled sideways, struggling to keep her bound hands in front of her face. One shoulder went through, one hip. No more. "I'm stuck." "Get ready." I pressed the middle of my back into the porcelain sink and used it for leverage as I threw both feet upward. There was just enough bend in my knees, and I shoved them out straight. The pressure in my back felt excruciating, but the cabinet rocked and Rachel squeezed through. She stumbled into the smoky room, but turned to peek at me through the open space. "Can you make it?" "I think so." "I better." I raised the wet towel to my face again and edged into the crack as Rachel had done. My knuckles scraped against the corner of the cabinet, and the belt loop on my jeans threatened to snag on the doorframe, but I forced my way through. "Run!" I screamed. The yellow sofa was fully engulfed now, flames licking at the front of the gun cabinet and spreading across the floor. The backs of my hands felt singed as I dashed after Rachel, edging sideways past the burning couch and taking 2 big leaps through the section of burning floor. The soles of my sneakers threatened to stick, but didn't. Beyond the flaming area, smoke obscured everything. A pale glow indicated that the men had left the kitchen light on, but it was impossible to see details. I dropped to my knees to get below the smoke. The outer door was straight ahead of me. I saw Rachel's legs heading toward the glow. "No!" I shouted. "Drop down! Go for the door!" Somehow in the roar of the fire and the craziness of our actions, she must have heard me. She fell to her knees and looked around dazedly. I dropped my towel just long enough to use my hands to point her toward the door. Snatching up the towel again, I inchwormed my way after her. Cold, clear air embraced us on the wooden front porch. We both hunched on our hands and knees, gasping, sucking in the cool elixir. A crash sounded behind me and I spun, rolling to one shoulder. The rush of new oxygen had fed the fire, sending flames to the ceiling. "We better get away from here. This whole place is gonna go." Without a plan, we stumbled to our feet and automatically headed up the road towards Sam's house. Somewhere in the hills, the sound of a siren wafted in and out. Chapter 25. Headlights came bouncing up the road behind us. I stumbled and spun to face them. A pickup truck. Not Kevin's, surely. I ran for the side of the road, moving awkwardly with my hands still bound.
Charlie, wait!"
I came to a dead halt. Drake? The truck pulled up beside us and he jammed the gear shift in park. Nobody had ever looked so good to me as my husband at that moment. He flung open the door and wrapped his arms around me.
"What are you doing out here?"
he asked as I began to shiver.
"Where's your coat?"
The fire. He sniffed, noticing my smoky odor, and held me at arm's length. He finally took in my sooty face, tangled hair, and the fact that my hands were tied. His eyes flitted to Rachel.
"Oh my God. Baby, what happened here?"
He motioned Rachel over and put an arm around each of us, rubbing our backs briskly to warm us. As he murmured soothing words, I burrowed my head into his chest and let the tears spill.
"Come on, we gotta get you inside,"
he said, leading us toward the truck. We pulled ourselves inside just as the flare of red strobes began to flash off the surrounding trees. "Fire department. The cabin." I nodded toward the burning structure.
"Yeah, I noticed."
His wry grin broke the awful evening's spell. "Hey, we didn't start it."
"It's not Sam's place, is it?"
I gave him a look. Rachel assured him it wasn't and pointed the way. He put the truck in gear and we turned in at Sam's driveway, just as the first fire truck topped the hill. 20 minutes later, after Drake had cut our bonds off and dressed our wounds, a few days of treatment with antibiotic salve and gauze would handle them, and Rachel had gone out to check on Sam's dogs, drugged but not dead, thank goodness, and I'd babbled out most of our story. We stood around the kitchen with mugs of hot chocolate. I had a million questions, but fatigue caused them to swirl in my brain in a sludge of incoherency.
"Ron tried to call you for hours."
"The phones aren't working." I'd already picked up the one in the study and found that it was still dead.
"We'll get back to town and report all this to the police. But there's something else. Before I tell you this next part, I want you to know that they're okay, so don't panic."
"What?" I gripped my warm mug. "There can't be more. Tell me there can't be more." I began pacing the length of the kitchen.
"You want to sit down? Hun, you're exhausted."
"Do I look like I could sit? What's going on?" He glanced toward Rachel, who sat at the counter looking numb.
"Okay. The reason Ron and Sam didn't get back when they said they would is because they were in an accident on the freeway."
Rachel's head snapped up and I stopped in mid-track.
"They're at the hospital now. Ron's got a broken arm. Sam's unconscious."
Rachel let out a tiny whimper. I set down my mug and went to her.
"They're doing tests. I don't know any more than that."
"We have to go," Rachel said. I wanted nothing more than a hot shower and to fall into one of the beds for a few hours, but I knew she was right. "How did you—" I turned to Drake.
"When Ron couldn't reach you, he was nearly in a panic. He called me and I flew in. I called him when I landed, and he told me you two were here alone. I wasn't even sure I could find the place, but his directions were good."
I rushed around the house, retrieving my purse and hoping I hadn't forgotten anything important. Over the past few days, my life had become so scattered, with possessions left at Rachel's and here. I'd lived in such disarray that I couldn't remember much. I had the vague feeling that I'd left my heavy jacket in Sam's truck, and I didn't hold out much hope of ever seeing it again. Drake shepherded us to his truck and turned up the heater. Once we'd bumped through a ditch to get around the fire trucks blocking most of the road. I must have succumbed to the warmth and motion. The next thing I knew, Drake was gently shaking my shoulder, and we were in the hospital parking lot. His dashboard clock said it was 11:30. Rachel rushed ahead of us to the emergency entrance and vanished through the doors. Drake and I took time for a long embrace on the sidewalk before facing the bright lights indoors. The warmth of his familiar body made me suddenly wish we were at home at this hour, wrapped together under the covers, finding each other in the dark in one of those fun, spontaneous encounters. And I wasn't sure how to start. Maybe it was better to do the test before telling him about it. He kissed the top of my head and pulled back.
"You forgot to wash your face,"
he said, smiling. He wiped some black off the tip of my nose. Like I had nothing else on my mind, I bristled for an instant.
"Drake, thank God you found them."
Ron stepped out the automatic doors.
"Come in a second. It's freezing out here."
My eyes took a minute to adjust to the brilliant fluorescence of the emergency room. People filled the waiting area, whole families, some looking frantic, others numb and sitting in plastic chairs. Ron's shirt sleeve had been raggedly clipped off, and his right arm sported a shiny white cast supported by a blue sling. His hair stood out in tufts on the sides, the thin top section mussed into a fuzzy nest. Aside from a few tiny cuts on his face, he looked okay.
"Sam's been in and out of consciousness. The doctors are saying. They've done some kind of scan on him. They actually let Rachel go back there. It may be tomorrow before they have a prognosis."
I looked around at the crowded room. "Do you plan to stay with him?"
"I feel like I should. I'm going to find a quiet spot and call the police,"
Drake murmured to me. He headed toward his truck. Once again the fatigue washed over me. "Can we find someplace a bit private?" Ron and I stepped out to the airlock between the two sets of automatic doors. As long as we stood to the side, we managed to keep the doors from standing open, but the nearly constant traffic of someone arriving or someone leaving interrupted every few minutes.
"I tried to reach you on the phone. I even left a message about the new information I'd gotten on Liz Pierce on your cell's voicemail."
I pulled the phone from my purse and looked. Yep, the tiny envelope icon told me I had a message waiting. "Well, we found out about Liz the hard way," I told him. I filled him in briefly on Kevin's breaking into Sam's garage, our escape through the woods, the capture and the fire.
"So, I guess Rachel will want to stay by Sam until we know he's out of danger. We should probably stay with her, in case Pierce tries anything more."
"Well, it's not going to be me. I've had plenty of this whole situation. I'm pooped and I'm going home. Kevin can get Rachel for all I care, and Sam can— Oh, God. I'm sorry.
What's with you, Charlie? You've been bitching at any and every little thing for the last week. It's driving everyone nuts."
Drake walked in right then. I caught the same question in his eyes and wanted to reassure him. But at that moment a fierce pain gripped the middle of me. I doubled over and swayed. He reached out to catch me, and someone shouted for a doctor. Chapter 26. I faded between darkness and light. People stood around a gurney, pushing me down a corridor, wheels squeaking, lights overhead running past like the white lines on a highway. I rolled to my side, the worst cramps of my life gripping me in the middle. "Drake, where are you?" His voice came from behind me. Ron's from somewhere near my feet. They both murmured reassuring things, but I couldn't concentrate. "BP's dropping," a female voice said. My vision blurred and I faded out of the scene. I woke up to find myself in a quiet room with dim lighting. Drake sat by my side. When he saw that my eyes had opened, he reached out and stroked my arm. I turned toward him and discovered that my left arm had tubes and needles taped to it. He settled for twining his fingers through mine on my right hand.
"It's okay, sweetie,"
he whispered. I brought my left hand over to lay the palm on my stomach. "It's gone, isn't it?" I asked, looking at his face for the first time. He nodded. His teeth clamped over his lower lip, and I could tell his eyes were moist. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I wanted to be sure.
Shush. It's okay. This last week wouldn't have been the best time.
Scenes from the past few days flashed through my mind. Too many things, too much to deal with. I closed my eyes and a tear slipped out.
We can have another one. A lot more if you want them.
A little chuckle escaped me. No, not lots. Promise me. He squeezed my hand.
Okay, not lots.
Drake? He stroked my face. I didn't even want this one. It's a terrible thing to say, but when I started to think it might be true, I kept thinking, no, it couldn't be. Then, for a while, I started to get used to the idea, and I thought it might be fun. But we shouldn't have a baby just because it might be fun. We should really, really want one and be ready for the responsibility, and I don't think I did. Do you think I could have wished for a miscarriage?
No, you could never have wished it. It just happened.
But I put myself in danger, I thought. The escape through the woods, the fire and smoke, I'd stressed my body more than I should have. But I didn't say it.
We'll talk about all this later. We'll decide.
He gave my hand a squeeze and stood up.
I'm going to get you some clothes. The doctor says you can go home in a few hours. They just want to watch your blood pressure for a little while.
For the first time, I looked down and realized I was wearing one of those flimsy hospital gowns that hide nothing. My hair still smelled like smoke. He caught my puzzled look.
They cut your clothes off and threw them away. It's okay. They were a mess anyway.
I could well imagine, with dirt, smoke, and blood. I turned my thoughts away from that. Can I have a shower?
Let's ask the nurse. Then I'll bring you something to wear and we'll pick up Rusty, and we'll have our family back together again.
Ron appeared at the doorway.
Hey, kiddo.
I gave him a grin that felt weak and waved him over to the bed. He took my hand and bent to kiss my cheek.
We may have to rename you Smokey the Detective,
he joked. Drake blew me a kiss as he slipped out. I know. I'm putting in for a shower right now. I leaned back against my pillows again. How's Sam and Rachel?
Things are still touch and go with him. She's at his side and not planning to budge until he wakes up.
It had been a rough night for all of us.
I'll sit with you until Drake gets back.
Ron propped his sling on his leg to take the pressure off his neck and shoulder.
Then I guess I better get home and figure out what's next.
I couldn't let myself go there because one thought would lead to another, and I wasn't ready to have to figure anything out yet. I must have dozed because I didn't remember anything else until I heard Drake talking to Ron.
Police said they have a warrant for Kevin Pierce,
he was saying. By the time I pried my eyes open, my brother had left, and my husband was holding out a soft sweatsuit.
Rusty's in the truck, eager to see you. The nurse said you're okay to go. So do you want your shower here or at home?
I glanced down and saw that someone had unhooked the tubes from my arm. Home. Let's just get out of here. I'd already swung my legs over the edge of the bed and reached for the sweatpants. Out in the parking lot, he unlocked the truck without a word and held my door open for me. Rusty nuzzled toward me from the back seat, and I gave his ears a brisk rub. I climbed in and stared out the front as Drake started the engine. He reached for the gear shift, but turned to me instead. I looked back at him. He reached over and took my hand, kissing the palm.
Either way, I don't mind.
That bothersome tingle came to my eyes again, and I consciously pushed it away. This was not the night to begin dwelling on this subject. I would go home, sleep 12 hours, wake up. Soon, again, I'd have fabulous sex with my husband and not leave the house for a week. So there. I'd just begun to doze again when we reached our own driveway. The place looked so good to me that I climbed out of the truck and nearly made the front porch before Drake locked the truck. The sky was already beginning to lighten in the east. If Rachel were flying today, the final Sunday of the balloon fiesta, we'd all be waking to our alarms right now. Thank goodness we weren't. Drake and I moved automatically through the routine of getting ready for bed, neither of us saying much. I stripped out of the new sweatsuit, dumping it beside Drake's flight bag with his week's worth of dirty laundry, and stepped into the shower. The hot water felt good, and I soaped and shampooed twice to get rid of the odor of smoke. Once I'd brushed my teeth and dried my hair, I felt nearly human. We climbed into the bed and snuggled together. The scent of clean skin enveloped us, and he nuzzled my neck. Then he yawned largely in mid-nuzzle and was asleep instantly. I wrapped his arm around myself and rolled onto my side. But sleep didn't come. Tired as my poor body felt, the combination of too much stimulation and my groggy spells at the hospital just weren't going to let me find that deep well of concentrated darkness I craved. I lay there with my eyes wide open as the room went from black to gray to full color. At some point, Drake rolled over and began snoring softly. When the bedside clock said 8:14, I gave up. I edged out from under the covers and tiptoed past the sacked-out dog to grab my thick terry robe from the back of the bathroom door. In the living room, I switched on the TV, tuning to one of the local stations that carried balloon fiesta coverage. With the volume low, I pulled an Afghan over my legs and watched the hundreds of bright orbs against the backdrop of a perfect blue New Mexico sky. My interest quickened as I spotted Sarah Haynes, whom I'd met at the pilot party, flying Early Morning Delight, and there was Scarlett's Dream. I wanted to look for Lady Liberty, but knew she wouldn't be there. I wondered how long before Sam would get home, before the crew would assemble and tend to the bag of crumpled fabric that now lay on Sam's garage floor. I wondered whether Rachel was still at his side at the hospital, or if they'd given her enough positive news that she'd been able to go home yet. Competition for the women's world altitude record. The words riveted my attention.
Yes, Sandy, that is big news,
the male news commentator said.
All week we've been covering the events leading up to top lady balloonist Rachel Fairfield's attempt at this record, and now it appears someone else is going to do it.
That's right, Dave. Rachel isn't even out here today. KQUE has been trying to reach her all morning to find out what's happened, but we've been unable to learn why the big change in plans.
Why, indeed. Well, that's going to remain the question of the day for now. Meanwhile, we've learned that the new contender is Liz Pierce, another New Mexico woman.
He consulted his notes.
Liz originally comes from Texas, moved to Albuquerque 3 years ago, and quickly became active in the ballooning scene.
Right, Dave.
Since Albuquerque is known as the hot air ballooning capital of the world,
Sandy emphasized these last words, as if every person in the audience didn't already know it. Many balloonists from around the country, and indeed around the world, move here for our nearly perfect flying conditions. I let them ramble on, blanking out much of it until I heard Kevin Pierce's name. Max, down on the field right now, talking live with Kevin Pierce, Liz Pierce's husband and crew chief for this flight. Max? Another talking head appeared, a dark-haired guy with less than camera-perfect looks, who, like the others, was bundled into the latest in chic outdoor jacket, cap, and gloves.
Thanks, Sandy. Dave. Yes, I've got an exclusive opportunity to speak with Kevin Pierce, Liz's husband, as they make the final preparations here on the field for her attempt at this important world record.
He turned and the camera angle widened to include the face of the guy who, at this point, probably thought he'd gotten rid of us last night.
Now, Kevin,
Max continued,
your wife's attempt at this record comes as quite a surprise to most of our viewers, I'm sure.
Well, Max, it's never been a real secret there were 2 women going for this record. Liz has always been the more experienced pilot, the one most likely to have actually accomplished the goal. The other lady's got an important brother, is all. He paid for lots of publicity. But Liz never let that intimidate her. She's got spunk, and she's gonna do this thing right.
I seethed over Kevin's gall. How dare he? I wanted to grab that stupid fuzzy caterpillar from his lower lip and rip it off.
So, continued Max the reporter, we see that Liz Pierce is about to take off here from Balloon Fiesta Park.
The camera panned out to capture Kevin striding over to the gondola of Beauty's Beast and exchanging a long kiss with his wife. Liz grinned and waved to the camera, then pulled a long blast on her burner and lifted off the ground.
We'll be following with Liz's chase crew, Max said, and bringing you the moment of touchdown when this historic flight concludes.
Historic my ass, I thought. There are hundreds of aviation records. Even Rachel admitted that this was just one of many. News people. Kings of hype. I watched the coverage switch back to the two anchors, then to shots of the entire sky now filled with color. I couldn't sit still. I stomped to the kitchen and pulled out the phone directory, punching in Rachel's number as soon as I found it. Apparently she either wasn't home yet or had shut off her phone to ignore the press. I left a quick message on her machine. The Pierce's audacity in going for the record attempt when Kevin knew full well why Rachel was out of the competition ate at me. The bastard deserved to be in jail for about a dozen reasons. Drake had reported this last night, but now I could pinpoint Kevin's location. I paged through the phone directory and picked up the telephone again.
Arson investigation. Smith speaking.
I couldn't conjure up the face to go with the bored-sounding voice, but that didn't matter. There was a cabin fire last night on Hummingbird Lane, off South 14. I know who started it. He locked 2 women inside, hoping to kill them.
Yes?
I hurried on. The man's name is Kevin Pierce. I spelled it in case the officer didn't get it the first time. His wife is on TV right now, at the Balloon Fiesta. So is he. Bring him in for questioning, look for prints at the scene. He's your man. His white pickup truck was there last night. There's probably evidence in that, too.
Ma'am, what's your name?
I hung up, took a deep breath. That felt good. Rusty padded out of the bedroom and joined me. I filled his bowl with nuggets and let him out the back door. Nice, familiar, routine things. As I tidied the kitchen, the wall calendar caught my eye. I flipped back to September, remembering where we'd been on which days. I'd only been 10 days late. My mind grappled with the thought. What should I be thinking now, anyway? What's done is done, I told myself. A gray feeling settled over me, but I blinked back the tears. It would take a while to sort this all out, I realized. I let the dog back in, made myself a cup of hot chocolate, and carried it back to the living room. With my Afghan once again warming my legs, I took a few sips of the soothing beverage. Television coverage of Liz Pierce continued as a newsman who'd managed to snag a ride with her crew chattered. The camera aimed toward open sky, able to pick up the balloon as only a dark dot against the stark blue. I felt my eyelids grew heavy, and I burrowed into the cushions. In the fitful sleep of early morning, I dreamed of being on the spot when police came for Kevin. I rode in the car with them to the police station, where the long institutional hallways suddenly turned into those of a hospital, and a nurse was congratulating me on the birth of twins. I woke with a jerk, clammy sweat covering my chest. I rubbed my face forcefully, digging sleep granules from the corners of my eyes. Rusty looked up at me from the rug, ears perked, questioning. "Whew, that was a nightmare," I said. My cocoa had become tepid, so I carried the mug to the kitchen and nuked it for a minute. Then, deciding that I really didn't want to fall back asleep, I dumped the old filter, found a new one, and started a fresh pot of coffee. While it brewed, I tiptoed into the bedroom, where Drake had now nestled completely under the covers, and pulled fresh clothes from the closet. Doing my best to avoid the squeaky places in the wood floor, I dressed in jeans and a sweater, brushed my teeth and hair, and swiped on a dash of lipstick. I felt nearly human. Coffee and toast helped me complete the illusion that I wasn't half dead with exhaustion. I found myself pulled to the television once again. We'd like to let our audience know that we're extending our Balloon Fiesta coverage this morning to let all of you witness Liz Pierce's historic world altitude record live. Sandy, the too-perfect news anchor, turned to Dave, her much-too-perfect cohort.
That's right, Sandy. Max and our cameraman Ted are on scene with the crew of Beauty's Beast, as Liz Pierce is about to land somewhere near the foothills of the Sandias.
Max's face came on again, and he filled about 10 minutes with nothing more than we already knew, keeping a running commentary on Liz's great achievement that nearly made me ill. The cameraman managed to capture a great video of the balloon drifting down to a picture-perfect landing, while the crew dashed out to catch it, and Kevin opened a bottle of champagne. Liz pulled off her knit cap and fluffed her hair quickly before turning to face the reporter.
"How high did you actually go, Liz?"
Max asked, shoving the microphone in front of Kevin's champagne bottle. 3,400 feet, she said, beaming.
Woohoo!
Kevin shouted, sending a blast of feedback through the mic. A chunky blond man wearing an FAA ball cap pushed his way to the gondola.
"Sorry,"
he said to the camera.
"Formalities first."
Kevin stepped back to allow the FAA man to reach into the gondola and lift out a wooden box about a foot long and 8 inches high. The barograph. It recorded the flight and would be sent to France to be certified before the record became official. But I had no doubt from the expression on Liz's face that she knew she'd done it. I felt a letdown for Rachel. All that work, now this. I'd picked up the remote, ready to end the misery, when something caught my eye. As Max babbled on, interviewing Liz about the details of the flight, I saw a uniformed APD officer approach Kevin in the background. As the man spoke, Kevin's expression turned from joy to disbelief to horror. Chapter 27. The cop played it cool and walked Kevin out of camera range. The news team, completely unaware of the real story, continued to chatter about Liz and the altitude record. I watched for a few more minutes until it became clear that they were winding down and hadn't picked up on the fact that Kevin was being questioned by the police. I carried my plate and mug back to the kitchen, itching to be out there watching it all unfold. I'd love to see the expression on Kevin's face when he learned that Rachel and I had gotten away. I imagined his shock when the police examined his truck and discovered particles of soot and ash. Surely they would still be there. Surely he hadn't taken the time to wash his clothes. I reached for the phone, wanting to tell the cops how to do their jobs. Before I touched it, it rang, startling me. "Charlie, it's Rachel." Her voice sounded flat. "How's Sam?" "Better. He'll be okay. He woke up. It must have been right after you left. I don't know. The whole thing's pretty blurry. Anyway, the doctor wanted to keep him awake for a few hours. He took a pretty good bump to the head, so I sat with him and talked and kept him talking. He's got broken ribs, and they aren't sure about other internal injuries yet. More tests today, I guess." "Sounds positive, though?" "Yes, much better than we'd expected. The cuts and puffy black eyes look pretty awful. I had a hard time getting past that and realizing those weren't the worst part. If there aren't any internal injuries, he should be out in a few more days." She took a deep breath. "I guess you've heard about Liz." "It's been all over the TV, and I figured reporters have probably been bugging you." "Yeah, 27 messages on my machine. I'm just too tired to say anything coherent right now. Yours is the only call I'm returning." "Well, Liz's little victory is going to be short-lived. The police are talking to Kevin right now." "About?" "About last night. Drake reported him while we were at the hospital." I didn't mention my own hospital ordeal. She had enough on her plate right now. I filled her in on the scene I'd just watched on TV. It's probably going to mean both of us testifying against him. Are you ready for that? I'm not ready for anything except a bath and about 20 hours of sleep right now. Sorry, I know, I should have waited on this. No, I'm glad. You know, I always thought Liz was a friend. Kevin, too. I would have never imagined this. I remembered the cozy little scene at the barbecue as Liz chatted with Rachel in the buffet line. Get your rest. Everything else can come later. The doorbell rang before I'd quite hung up the phone. I heard Rusty growl from the living room, and I rushed to get to the door before he could get into a complete fit and wake up Drake.
Charlotte Parker?
The black man in the blue suit held up a badge. Oh, God, now what?
You phoned arson investigation this morning?
Yeah, I did. Caller ID. I'd forgotten that most police calls gave them all they needed to know. That business about asking my name, totally unnecessary. Come in, I said, stepping back. He walked in the way cops do, scanning the room and getting the layout in his mind, introduced himself as Detective Henson.
Actually, Drake Langston reported the arson last night. Your call just confirmed it.
My husband's asleep. We had a very late night. Do you mind if we talk in the kitchen? I led the way, filled 2 coffee mugs, and gave him the whole story. He scribbled notes and asked for 1 refill along the way. When I'd finished, he closed his notebook and asked whether Rachel could verify everything I'd told him. I'm sure she will, just not today. She was at the hospital all night and just got home. This past month has been hell on her.
Understand. We'll get with her in a day or so.
So what's going to happen to Kevin?
Evidence techs are out at the cabin now. We knew we had an arson by the time the fire crew got the flames under control. Furniture piled in front of a bathroom door, accelerant on the sofa. It was pretty clear. When I took your call this morning, I picked up on the fact that Pierce's white truck was at the scene.
He grinned at me.
Yes, we do know how to match ash debris from the truck to that in the cabin. Don't worry, we'll get him.
He carried his mug to the sink and rinsed it.
The arson's going to be just one of Kevin Pierce's problems. Stalking and attempted murder earn even bigger points. I hope Miss Fairfield's kept those notes.
She has.
And she'll testify?
We both will. Henson stuffed his notebook and pen into an inside pocket and walked into the living room.
What's going on?
Drake emerged from the bedroom wearing a pair of jeans and crookedly hanging polo shirt. His hair stuck out in little sleep twirls. Hon, this is Detective Henson from Arson Investigation. I briefed him quickly about the way Henson had found me.
You have anything you'd like to add to this story?
Henson asked.
I wasn't there.
He told the detective how he'd gotten the call and came looking for us, only to find 2 stunned, smoky women with their hands tied, wandering up a mountain road. By the time he finished, Henson's jaw had begun to twitch, and I had tears in my eyes.
We'll get the son of a bitch,
he assured us. I spent the next couple of weeks in my office at RJP Investigations, doing the paperwork I'd planned to do during what I called the week that went totally wrong. Drake had no out-of-town work, so we settled into a comfortable routine where he spent his days at the airport, catching up on maintenance on the helicopter, while I reveled in the mundane tasks of payroll, accounts payable and receivable, and going through the stacks of mail that awaited on my desk. Even the dog seemed pleased with the familiarity of our ordinary life as he lay flat out, belly up, on the floor of my office day after day. A week later, Rachel called. Sam's home now, and we want to do a little something to thank the crew. And you and Drake and Ron, too, of course. How about a barbecue out at Sam's place on Saturday? I accepted for all of us. Saturday dawned as one of those perfect October days, the last of our Indian summer. It wouldn't be long now until we began to feel the chill winds of winter. But this day would be just right for the gathering in the mountains. It felt strange to drive past the burned-out shell of the neighboring cabin. Drake and I both got quiet as we approached. He squeezed my hand, and I sent a little smile his way. At Sam's, the beer had begun to flow, and the steaks were already smelling good. I left Drake and Ron beside the male gathering on the porch, while I went inside to offer Rachel a hand in the kitchen. I found her putting the finishing touches on a salad. Pots of baked beans and ears of corn boiled on the stovetop. She looked up and crossed the room to pull me into a warm embrace. We'd only spoken on the phone a couple of times since that climactic weekend, and I'd worried that things might be a little awkward between us. "You doing okay?" I knew she referred to the miscarriage, and I nodded. "How about you?" "My father's been trying to call, but I haven't felt ready to talk to him yet," she said, shaking a bottle of salad dressing. "Do you think that's wrong?" In the craziness of the last flight and that night in the cabin, I hadn't found the right time and place to tell Rachel the full story, only to tell her that I'd been convinced that her father was not the one sending the threats. Now I pulled her aside to the big sectional sofa and filled her in on Dean Patterson's confession and his current condition. Her face drained of color as the story unfolded. "My God, I sent him to prison for nothing." "Patterson was very cunning," I said, deliberately staying away from her mother's role in the whole thing. "He purposely misdirected you. He wanted your father out of the mayoral race and out of your lives, and he accomplished that. You were wronged in so many ways, Rachel." Tears welled in her eyes, but didn't get the chance to overflow before Justin came striding into the room.
"Sam says he needs a platter for the steaks."
Rachel ducked her head, and I intercepted Justin. As she fled for the bathroom, I steered him to the kitchen and rummaged through cupboards until we came up with a couple of big plates. Once he'd left, Rachel reappeared, her face pale but composed. "I'll have to deal with this news later. Right now, there are people to feed." I started to offer to handle that part of it, but realized that she really wanted to buy some time. This was the kind of thing that would haunt her late at night, for more nights than she wanted to think about. For now, social interaction might stave off the demons. We just finished putting the food on the table when the male horde descended, bearing a pile of savory meat and the laughter of a carefree day. After everyone had taken seats, Sam called the group to attention.
"To life, to love, and to a terrific set of friends. You all hold a special place in our hearts."
Rachel nodded agreement, and glasses clinked around the table. I caught Ron's eye and realized he wanted to say something, but he held off until we'd all loaded our plates with food, and the serious appetites became somewhat sated.
"I have good news, too,"
he finally announced.
"Kevin Pierce has been arrested on charges of arson, breaking and entering, malicious destruction of property, and attempted murder. 2 counts.
He gave a triumphant smile. "Malicious destruction of property?" I asked. I'd told Ron about the knife on the floor, but that there'd been no damage to the balloon.
"The bullet holes. The jerk actually admitted to firing those shots, but said he wasn't trying to kill anyone, just to harm the balloon and scare Rachel. Breaking and entering was for the incident here at Sam's garage. Even though Kevin got his knife back, his prints were all over the door frame and some of Rachel's other equipment in the garage. The investigators also got great sets of sooty prints off Kevin's truck. Kevin and the other guy, Roger Gibson, were neatly placed at the arson scene because of ashes in the truck that matched those from the cabin."
"What about this Roger Gibson? Who's he?"
"A good candidate for America's stupidest criminals, I'd guess. Guy's got a sheet that goes back years, lots of petty smash and grab type stuff. He gets arrested, does a few months, and comes back for more. Lived down the street from Kevin, and they hooked up over beers at some bar in the South Valley. Guess Roger talks more intelligently when he's had a few, 'cause he convinced Kevin he was the man for the job, vandalizing the balloon and putting another scare into Rachel."
"So, what's going to happen to them now?"
"Rogers pleaded to some stupid little count in return for telling all the juicy details. Kevin, he's got some hot lawyer. Guess they're selling their house to afford him, which leaves Liz.
living with her mother.
Oh boy, I bet she's loving that.
Yeah, well, the best part is that even the pricey lawyer hasn't managed to get Kevin out yet. The more he blabs, the less his attorney can do for him.
I pictured Kevin with his scroungy hair and that repulsive little beard thing. Scraps of his braggadocious comments to Rachel and me, as he tied our hands and planned to kill us, came back to me. I hoped he kept up the bragging through his whole jail time and right into the state pen. Rachel piped up. The good news is that there wasn't any damage to the balloon, thanks to my wonderful crew. She tilted her head toward the end of the table. They've pulled the balloon out of the bag and we've examined every inch of it. The bullet holes still make me fighting mad, but she's structurally sound and ready for the flight. We checked over the other equipment, too, and wiped off the fingerprint dust the cops left behind.
So, you're going for the record?
Oh, hell yes! She laughed with more carefree warmth than I'd ever heard from her. Chapter 28. November 15th. With little fanfare, no reporters, and a very subdued Grayson Fairfield on hand, we met at the Moriarty Airport, a little town on the east side of the Sandias, away from Albuquerque's bustle and traffic. Justin ably directed the crew members in the duties they already knew well. Ron, Sam, Drake, and I, along with Grayson, looked on. The FAA man was off to the side with Rachel, going over the use of the barograph, that sensitive instrument which would record her flight. We'd heard through the grapevine that Liz's record had been certified at 33,428 feet, a bit less than she'd claimed upon her triumphant landing. Rachel felt confident that she could beat it, but nothing's certain in this game. Sam kept a watchful eye on the sky. Earlier, just before sunrise, a layer of high, thin clouds had moved over the mountains, and they'd now scattered. That seemed worrisome to him, something about potentially high winds aloft.
Once the guys get the envelope inflated and it's standing upright, he'll place the barograph inside,
Sam said, nodding toward John O'Malley, the FAA designee. Sam walked over to the back of Rachel's new truck and sorted through the equipment lying on the tailgate. She was already wearing her parachute, something she'd confided that she was terrified of using. I'm going to float down with the balloon unless there's absolutely no other choice, she'd told me. Now Sam picked up the oxygen tank and hooked it into its bracket in the gondola. He hooked up the lines and checked them. Rachel rechecked everything around the truck, making sure she hadn't left anything crucial behind. She climbed into the gondola and submitted to Sam strapping the oxygen mask around her head and placing her warm knit cap over the straps. She pulled the mask aside just long enough to give him a kiss, then waited as the FAA man set the crucial wooden box in next to her feet.
Give it a little tap with your foot when you reach the top, just to make sure it registers,
he said.
Radio check,
said Sam. They went through a minute or so of verifying that the equipment worked. The rest of us doled out hugs and squeezed her hands before backing away. Just as we did, a news van from Channel 6 roared up. Sam's face hardened as he realized who it was.
Keep that guy out of the way,
he shouted as the reporter and cameraman bailed from the van. I turned to Ron, who turned to Grayson. The banker shrugged his shoulders.
Couldn't let the event go unrecorded,
he said. I wanted to slap him on Rachel's behalf, but restrained myself. Drake approached the newsmen and, with his usual diplomatic calm, assured them that they could get better shots by staying back. Before they could argue, Rachel blew a gloved-hand kiss to the crowd and hit the burner. I watched in awe as the balloon climbed quickly. This was no leisurely drifting voyage over the crowded balloon field. Fuel consumption was everything here, the goal being to get as high as possible as fast as possible. Within seconds, Sam had the crew loading the inflator fan and the other little items into the truck. Minutes later, the balloon had become a dot in the sky, and we were on the road, 4 vehicles full of us. We stopped at the interstate, watching the dot grow smaller by the minute.
No sense in heading out yet. Until she starts to back down, we won't know for sure how far away she'll be,"
Sam said. The balloon faded from sight. A tiny contrail formed as the craft entered the frigid air above 20,000 feet. I thought of Rachel's fear of having to use the parachute and sent up a silent prayer for her safety. Sam became very quiet, never taking his eyes off the little wisp of white vapor.
"She's probably switched to the second tank now. Time someone?"
Justin, who'd set his watch to keep track of elapsed time, read it off for Sam. I could almost see the calculations run through his head. Rachel could use about 3/4 of her fuel going up, reserving 1/4 for coming back down and landing. Sam, of course, knew all this in gallons and elapsed time, but only the news reporter was brave enough to interrupt him to ask about it. For his trouble, the man got a curt, "Later." Radio static came over Sam's CB, and he asked her to say again. More static.
"Let's move,"
Sam shouted. He and the crew piled into the pickup truck. Drake and I, Ron and the FAA guy, belted ourselves into my Jeep, Drake at the wheel. The reporter in the news van tried to push ahead, but eventually made himself content with staying behind us, followed by Grayson alone in his Mercedes. The man had been a pain from the start, and I wondered whether Ron was truly getting the promised fantastic mortgage rate in return for putting up with him. Drake ably managed to stay behind Sam along the interstate. We pulled over from time to time as the crew watched the balloon once again become a dot, then a shape.
"There she is,"
Drake said, breaking into my thoughts. I looked out to see Lady Liberty's beautiful red, white, and blue design as she floated ahead of us, about a half-mile away. Somehow, when I hadn't been paying attention, we'd exited off the interstate and were now on a paved 2-lane heading south. Sam roared along the road, not wanting to lose sight of her at this crucial juncture. Drake barreled forward, staying with him until Sam whipped to the side of the road and stopped. Luckily, the reporter was also on top of things. I glanced back nervously to see him slam on the brakes just in time. Grayson wasn't so lucky. He ended up roaring past and stopping in front of Sam. Rachel and her airy craft floated about 15 feet off the ground, east of our position. I wanted to edge her to the right, to make the balloon land on the road ahead of us, but unfortunately, they don't work that way. Sam rolled forward again, edging around Grayson's car, and cruised until someone pointed out a farm road. He took it, and one of the crew guys jumped out to open the gate. He closed it again after the 4 vehicles had pulled through. Sam waited for him, then raced off in a cloud of dust. The balloon was to our right, and the wind had begun to pick up. She wouldn't be able to hold it inflated on the ground. We lost sight of Sam momentarily in the swirling dust. Seconds later, though, we caught a glimpse of the truck and saw Rachel's crew running across the open field. Sage and prairie grass tore at our legs as we ran toward the downed balloon. Rachel greeted us with a huge grin and tried to hug everyone at once. "Over 34, maybe closer to 35. I'm sure I got at least that high." John pulled the barograph from the basket, looking it over and flipping a switch to deactivate it. The little instrument had done its job. Now it was up to the Federation to certify the results. He carried it to the Jeep and set it carefully on the back seat, just as Grayson pulled up in the car that hadn't been able to keep up with everyone else. He joined his sister and seemed genuinely happy about her success. Champagne appeared from a cooler and spurted brilliantly for the news camera. Rachel got the traditional christening from the first bottle and conducted an amazingly composed interview with bubbles of foam dripping from her face. I stepped away from the hubbub for a minute. Kevin, in jail and probably facing serious time, all in the name of taking the spotlight, and that for only a short time. Liz, who'd held the world altitude record for only a month. I wondered if she felt it was all worth it. And me. Drake and I had talked about managing to be home together more. Drake and Ron, both with cameras, snapped about a zillion pictures. The crew guys took swigs of champagne from the bottle. Sam, ever watchful, made sure the equipment was all put away before he let anyone have much to drink. Rachel came over to me once the news team had gotten enough for their 30-second spot. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thanks, Charlie. You know I wouldn't have been here today to do this, except for you." I, of course, teared up, and we held our embrace a moment before each of us could take a deep breath. "I started out doing this because it was a challenge, like climbing the Colorado 14ers, something I thought I'd enjoy just for the pleasure of doing it. But you know, things changed along the way. Gray started that stupid publicity campaign, and I began to hate the whole project. Didn't even want to do it for a while. Then the threats. Part of me wanted to quit, several times in fact. But a big part of me knew that I couldn't give in. You can't let bullies call the shots, and that's just what I would have been doing. They threatened me, I quit. Give them just what they wanted? You'd never do that. Does it sound too corny to say that you have that all-American spirit?" She chuckled. "I don't mind if it's corny." A car pulled up just then, Grayson's Mercedes. None of us realized that he'd left. He stopped behind my Jeep, and Bill Fairfield stepped out. Rachel tensed. He walked over to us, his eyes steady on her. "Shall I?" I began. "No, stay. I'm not ready to be alone with him."
"Rachel, I can't expect everything to suddenly be all right between us,"
he said. His voice was surprisingly quiet. I think she'd expected a politician's bold oration.
"I just wanted to come out and tell you how proud I am. I know I never gave you a fair shake as a kid. I didn't see you as ambitious enough, wanting to achieve enough. And I should have paid more attention to the things that were going on with your mother. Maybe I could have protected you."
She started to say something, but he stepped in.
"I was wrong."
After "I love you," those are probably the most powerful words a person can say. Harder to say, in fact, than the words of love. I turned away to give them a private moment, but Rachel gripped my hand. "Yes, Dad, you were. I never had your ambitions, and I still don't. This wasn't something I did for fame." She pointedly looked at her brother. "I did this for me, just to know that I could." Bill looked like he wanted to come closer, to hug his daughter, but he hesitated.
"I was wrong about a lot of other things, too, when you were a kid."
He couldn't meet her eyes.
"I only thought about my own goals, and I've been so sorry I didn't see beyond them. I didn't treat anyone well, including your mother. It's largely my fault that she ended up the way she did."
Rachel simply nodded. Grayson stood stock still, disbelief registering on his face. Much family history was being clarified in these moments, and he clearly was having a hard time taking it all in. I felt decidedly out of place, but Rachel kept her grip on my hand until Drake walked up.
"Trouble?"
he asked. Rachel smiled up at him with the grace of an angel. She took my hand and placed it in his. "No trouble. In fact, a lot of trouble has gotten better." As Drake and I turned to walk away, I heard Rachel's voice. "Better," I said. "Not gone, not perfect. But maybe we can work on that. I misjudged you in a lot of ways, too." I sneaked a peek backward to see that she'd placed her hand on her father's shoulder. It had been a memorable month, in all ways. This concludes Balloons Can Be Murder by Connie Shelton. This novel is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual events, locales, or persons, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. If you would like to receive our online newsletter listing new releases, simply go to booksinmotion.com and register with your email address. Newsletter members receive special discounts and freebies. No purchase necessary. That's one word, booksinmotion.com. From Books in Motion, this is Rebecca Cook. Thanks for listening.